All right, everyone. Donald Trump the other day on Truth Social had a pretty stark warning for everyone. Now, I'll get deeper into the analysis of the actual threat here. Link in the description. It's just to Gateway Pundit, so I won't bother archiving it. First come the tanks, then come the nukes, and Donald Trump warning that we need to stop the crazy war in Ukraine. Of course, people initially jumped on this and said, well, see, look, he's Russian-controlled. He's saying that the Ukrainians should give up. Now, there is no actual suggestion of that, to be clear. Donald Trump would be able to wind down the war in Ukraine just by getting back into office. To be clear, as I've analyzed now for years, Donald Trump has one qualification above all others that really helped him in the diplomacy department. Not with Western Europe. He pissed Macron and others off there on a routine basis. No, but it helps him certainly with dealing with Russia or China. It's not even related directly to his business endeavors. It's related to having done those and therefore understanding how to conduct political endeavors. If you are doing business in the United Kingdom, and then you do business in Russia, the way in which you act, the way in which you interact with people is not going to be the same. There was a New York Times study on the different ways that you have like corporate negotiations within companies throughout the world. They're all totally different. Japan is not China. Russia is not France. Great Britain's not the United States. There are deviations, but some are more similar than others, especially for diplomatic purposes. There is a decorum in, for instance, the United States, Canada, Western Europe, to the most part, versus Eastern Europe, versus Eurasia, versus East Asia more broadly, versus Africa, West Africa, South Africa, versus the Latin American countries or Central America. There are vastly different ways in which you go about interacting with other people. It trickles down to day-to-day life. The way in which you act in public in the Netherlands isn't even the same as the way you act in public in Germany. There's a difference. You've gone, in my case, you go 10 miles and you have to have a different set of behavioral rules and expectations, and those are similar cultures. They're both in Northwest Europe. They're both part of the EU. The language has some overlap. The cultures intermingle pretty easily. There's not even a border there. There's no checking at the border. It's a part of the Schengen area. There's still a difference. The feeling is different. The way in which people act is different. The language they speak is different. Trump understood this. He's done business in Russia. He's done business in China, etc., etc. Biden hasn't. There's your problem. You've got a steward leading the United States right now who's willing to send Abrams tanks and missile batteries and rockets and all sorts of shit to Ukraine, while simultaneously managing to accomplish two negative things. Number one, poking the bear, inflaming the situation without Ukraine having a clear path forward to any form of victory. So you're just prolonging a war needlessly. It's not a NATO member. It's unfortunate they were invaded, but you're escalating the situation, just to be clear. That's number one. Number two, while looking an absolute ass domestically, because while you're giving machine guns to Ukrainians, you're also telling American citizens that you shouldn't have more than 10 bullets in your magazine. It comes off as a little bit hypocritical, and I guarantee it's not just the uber gun rights far-right voting bloc that thinks so. I have my finger on the pulse of independent voters, too. I technically am one, although ideologically I admit I'm not exactly a centrist. They're not very happy about the discrepancy, Joe. But ask him if he understands any of this. He barely understands his own name sometimes. That's why Putin is doing what he's doing. There's a reason why the second that the Biden stewardship began, he decided to invade. The bullshit line as well. Putin didn't invade the Ukrainians when Trump was president because he had his puppet on the throne, and so he didn't have to worry about anything. Once Big Bad Joe got in there, and he's going to take him out behind the woodshed and stuff, he got nervous, so he decided to all of a sudden muster and mass invade the Ukrainians. That's the bullshit line. The real line is that Putin would have been fucked in the ass if he had invaded under Donald Trump. No, Trump wasn't a puppet of Putin. Putin feared him. That's the truth, the long and short of it. The madman strategy sort of thing in Syria and elsewhere, although I oppose the Syrian air base strikes that happened, you'll remember that many years ago, they did work. Psychologically speaking, Trump's strategy works. Stacking his, and this is both a real double-edged sword here. stacking his cabinet with people like Bolton to make America's enemies frightened that we were going to go full W again and invade several people. It worked. Now, backfired, of course, the second that the Trump administration ends its first term, all of these people stabbed him in the back, so all the Boltons and Pompeos of the world now hate him. But it worked at the time. We didn't have any new wars for 4 years. We drew down several of the wars and conflicts that we were involved in. We were still running guns, we're still doing drone strikes, and I oppose much of that happening outside of a very limited context. But it was better than what we've got now, isn't it? The world situation has imploded over the last 2 years. We're not just talking about Ukraine. We're talking about Korea. There is a flashpoint. Taiwan versus China. India and Pakistan. Burkina Faso just kicked out the French. What do you think that they're about to do? The government there is using the excuse that they want to tackle the terrorists themselves. Oh, bullshit. Either the terrorists are going to take over the country or you're going to go on an ethnic purge. We've seen this before. It's going to be Hotel Rwanda all over again. By the way, official prediction. Look forward to the next few months of ethnic cleansing and tales of people being dragged off to the gulag randomly in Burkina Faso. Thankfully, most Americans don't know that the country exists, so they won't call for your nation to be invaded. They're too busy warmongering in Ukraine, and that is what it is. Now, as far as the threat of nuclear war, I don't think that sending Abrams or Leopard tanks into Ukraine is going to pop off World War III. That's the good news. But it will prolong a conflict in which the Russians really, generally in the eastern part of the country, can establish air superiority anyway. The Ukrainians can't really countermand them in doing so. They're doing very good on the land. They have an advantage over some elements of the Russian military, especially since they're fighting on their own turf, essentially. They've developed kamikaze drones, which I think I suggested at the outset was a good idea. That being said, I don't see how 31 tanks is really going to change the metric. All it does is force Russia more diplomatically into a corner where they're going to be more aggressive. You know, I can't say... The problem is that no matter how many weapons you give Ukraine, no matter how sophisticated they are, Russia simply has much more manpower and much more resources. That's why the entire West combined right now is sending resources and technically manpower, Mercs, Blackwater, etc., into Ukraine. We're managing to break even against the Russians. Just to be clear, this is not Ukraine v. Russia. This is NATO v. Russia. And the Russians still hold a significant chunk of Ukraine. Basically, at this point, we're just testing toys, prolonging the war in order for politicians to grift money. That's the long and short of it. These people don't care about the Ukraine. You think Joe Biden gives a damn about Ukraine? You think he cares about little kids getting droned there? He seems to be gleeful when it happens in Yemen or Afghanistan, so why the fuck would he give a shit? And if you think, by the way, in closing I'll say this, that Russia is the big bad boogeyman that really needs the counterbalancing of the entire Western world against it, that sort of doesn't coincide with what you're being told by the legacy media now, is it? You're being told, oh, the Russians are fighting with old rusted out AKs that were found in a waterlogged crate for 40 years. They were stored in someone's basement. They're fighting with old manual firearms from the early 20th century. Ha ha ha, here's a Russian tank that got totaled and now it's being dragged off by a Ukrainian tractor. If they are indeed suffering so badly and their troops are so pissed off and the people of Russia and Putin is so inept that he's literally falling down the stairs and shitting himself, literal story headline from last month, then why would you be so worried about the big great Russian bear taking over the world or something like that, or starting World War III? If their conditions on the ground are so poor, how would you even have an assurance that their nukes work? Maybe those don't work. Maybe they're like the old rusted out AKs, but nobody seems to be asking this question. Again, as someone who does not support Russia or Putin, I'm not a tanky or into the Vatnik sort of bullshit. Putin is not a strong man. He's an old man, just like Joe Biden, etc. That does not mean that I want to escalate war and cause more people to suffer. People are being far too flippant about the concept of killing others. They're being flippant. They're also being fed the dehumanizing line of, oh, well, they're just Russians, so, yeah, kill them. It's like, well, they've got families too, but I suppose you don't care about them because of the language they speak or the religion they happen to follow. That's about all. Peace out.